presentation. Looking at the schedule, I see is a very brief introduction or overview from us. I want to just cover a few things with this. And I don't want to give you a lot of details, but I want to give you an idea of how this came about. And I want to make this scientific case for why we have to do this. And there are going to be two parts to that scientific case. The scientific need from our point of view and the need to intersect with the world. And then Greg is going to take over from there and talk about why we think we need to do it in an open source, open science, open commercialization way. This whole project has been boiling or simmering around in my career for some years, because this need has been recognized, at least by us, for some time, but we didn't have all the pieces together. When I had a really nice conversation with Greg, it's almost a year ago now, at the pizza place, Paul Revere's, which is very nice. We just decided to do it, and Greg's been working. We found ways of funding it so far. We think we're pretty close to the point where we need to make this thing work on a bigger level. That's why we're here. So I'll start with the sort of framing the scientific question, the scientific and sort of world question. And I think we're on the verge of a new revolution in science. We've been, in our lifetime, have many such revolutions. In particular, the genomics, genetics kinds of things. We can now sequence genomes of any organism we want, and it's cheap. But remember, this thing cost billions of dollars for the first human genome, and now it's down to $1,000. That change in price is not an incremental thing. It enables us to do new things. So a lot of times taking technology that's restricted to a few and making it available to all has not an incremental effect. And that's sort of what we're talking about. Now, back to why this is a big issue, because we now have all this data on the genetics of all these organisms, but we don't know how this correlates or how this is related to how they function. That's a study called phenomics, or we call it phenometrics. It's out and saying, what's the connection between all that data on the genes and how they actually perform? And that's a hard thing to do, because it's a series of platforms. The genetics thing, you can send out, anyone can send their samples off to one center, and then they can sequence that stuff and give you a pile of data. Then the real job is to figure out what that is and what it means. But for understanding how something performs, every single thing that organism does requires a new technology to put in place. So we're interested in photosynthesis, and here I'm just going to show you a movie of actually growth and photosynthesis going on at the same time. Taken with our instrumentation here, this is in a Arabidopsis plant. You can see doing all sorts of interesting things. That's actually energy being captured, light energy being captured and stored into a plant, a biomass. You can imagine that this kind of performance data here will be critical for understanding how to make plants better. And in fact, I go a little bit more into this. Very, very briefly though. This is how energy is conserved by plants. You can see that a lot of energy, this is the sunlight coming through here. And the width, this tells you how much energy is there in the sunlight. And what you're left with here at the end is about 1%. That drives all of our food and fuels. I put an airplane, I have various versions of this. This one has an aircraft on it because we were pitching this to Boeing. They didn't give us any money. And those are 787s. Anyhow, we have a series of these for different manufacturers. The point is, that's all of us. And then we have to understand why the energy is lost. You can notice there's a big loss here. That's the plants deliberately dumping their excess energy so they don't destroy themselves. So photosynthesis is dangerous. It involves the highest energy intermediates on the planet of biology. And if they don't handle this correctly, they'll self-destruct. Now that looks bad, but if we're able through our efforts to change this by 1%, we can double the productivity of plants. And we know that it's possible. because there are different variants out there, different organisms that do that. We just have to understand how they do it. Okay? And then we can transform our existing crops into more productive ones. But the problem is, I'm getting to the point. I do eventually get to the point. The problem is that these guys, they've evolved to live out in the wild, and it's these unpredictable, fluctuating environmental conditions. They don't know what the weather's going to be, and it can kill them. They evolved to cope with unpredictable environmental conditions, but by and large, they are studied in the laboratories under artificially static conditions. This is because science is simple. We can solve simple problems, but when we go to more complex problems, yeah, it's difficult. So if you want to get papers out, you got to start with a simple problem. That's really important. But we don't have time to do that. We have 50 years to double our productivity of food. And we're, okay, this is not something that we can solve now by taking two different lines and putting them on the benchtop and measuring one thing. It's not possible. We have to measure lots of things and lots of different mutants or variants under lots and lots of different conditions that approach what's going on. And this is absolutely critical because if we don't get it right, we're in trouble. And we know this. The seed companies and the algae company know this because they can see stuff in the laboratory and it looks great, and they put it out in the field and it sucks. And our goal is to find out why it sucks so we can make it better. Yeah? It's because you can make a greenhouse grown, you know this, like glass, it's a common expression, a glass house flower or something that doesn't grow outside. You can make something beautiful under controlled conditions, but out there it's a different story. So anyhow, now I'm really getting to the point. Here, I came to MSU to do this project, which is what we call next generation phenotyping or phenometrics. And MSU has been very, very supportive of this thing. This is a project that involves many researchers, many laboratories. We're building the technology to phenotype plants, algae, cyanobacteria, anything that conserves light energy under realistic conditions. And what we're doing essentially is bringing those natural conditions into a controlled setting. So we can go out in the field and record something and replay it in these conditions. And not only replay it, but we can measure all that stuff that I told you about. So we can see the dynamic responses and distinguish them. Okay. So this is the kind of thing we say. So here's an algae a photobioreactor array, and this has been commercialized. So we've done commercialization stuff, real commercialization. It's not this open stuff. And I would tell you, it's a pain. And then we've got stuff for plants, which is also there's interest in commercializing that stuff. But I just wanted to show you that this is the kind of thing you get. You can see different responses. These are different plants, different variants, and you can see them flashing on and off in different ways under fluctuating conditions. These responses have never been seen before. In fact, most of these, when you knock out genes, they don't do anything under laboratory conditions. Only 2% of the genes that knock out do anything, which means that we don't understand what 98% of them, we don't even know if they have a function. They're called genes of unknown function. But now we're able to identify, even with just this first shot, 20% of those, which is different, 2% to 20%. Anyhow, this is what the kind of pretty data you get out of. These are heat maps showing the responses of photosynthesis over time. And you can just see there's all sorts of cool things that you can see right away. Okay, okay, and we can measure lots of stuff. I'm not going to tell you. Oh, I don't want to take up too much time.
No,
I know.
I'll totally take it.
You're attracted to it. But I wanted to move on and show you what we have to do next. So we're bringing those conditions into the lab, and now we have to do the opposite. We have to get that out there. We don't know what variation there is out in the field, out in the real world. We need to validate that. And that's where we actually built, this is some years ago, maybe 15 years ago, I built this one. This is a field version of some of our instruments. And when you go out in the field, you can measure stuff. That's what this shows. In plants, that tells you how they're going to perform. That's relevant. I won't go into detail. And this is actually the productivity. And over here is some parameter we measure. This is where we connect with the real world. And I don't want to take up too much time, but I want to say that the other half of my compelling argument for going in this direction has to do with my meeting with a researcher from Botswana at a meeting in Japan where we were talking about this data exactly. And he said, I want to do this because there are crops that we grow out in the Kalahari Desert, and that's where our watermelons came and all that. None of these companies are interested in improving these things. Can we have some of your tools? Well, yeah, and he says, well, we have a number of really great people, but when I went to the company to buy a simple instrument, it costs $50,000, which is that's the budget of our institute. So how do we now? We have two complementary needs. They can do this great work, and we can't. Obviously, we don't know anything about that stuff up there, but they can do it. But we have to get those instruments to us. And so, Greg and I and Ben and Robert have been working together to do this. We've been building an instrument that Greg's going to show you. I just presented some data on it that shows that how it can be useful in algae. And the big thing here is that it can measure the dynamics of photosynthesis under real conditions. And this is a demonstration of utility for the kind of applications that we want to do. I won't, unless there's a question, I won't tell you what all this means. But it's very cool. and it's very useful. It actually points to the questions. There are cases that we can come up with where the dynamics of the responses of photosynthetic parameters can be shown to be a limiting factor. And also the type of photosynthesis shown to be a limiting factor. We know that there's variation out there. We need to bioprospect it. And we can't do this on our own. But the world can do this with us.
Prospecting for energy?
So, I would call it efficiency and robustness of energy captured by photosynthetic organisms. So plants, they not only have to be efficient, but they have to be robust. If they're very efficient, they don't do well out there, that's bad. For bioenergy, it's the same thing. If you want to grow algae, it's very important that they actually study them under the real conditions. But I think there'll be more questions after. I didn't take up too much of your time.
Here, can you, or is it, you may have to. Okay, fine.
Okay, you don't know that's on my data.
This is the short version. That's actually the second to last slide. Can I make this full screen?
You can zoom.
It's actually okay. So I'm going to sort of pick up where Dave left off, post-science. This slideshow moves for me. And talk about how you would bring this kind of technology to market and why bringing it to market in an open way is relevant and important and potentially useful for organizations like MSU. So first, probably a lot of people don't even know what open commercialization is. Honestly, neither do I, and neither does anybody else. So we're making this up on the fly. There's a lot of terms out there that get used: value networks, open commercialization, open source. There's a lot of these terms that, some of which are well defined in certain industries, but not generally. So I'm using this broad term called open commercialization, and I'm defining it this way: bringing value, so that's products, services, it could be stories, it could be a platform, to market without using intellectual property, while actively sharing that product's design, concept, and method. So you see this sort of the place where this is most active right now is in open source software, which probably a lot of you have heard about. Many of you probably use open source software, or you're running computers on servers which are running open source software. So open source software is big. Red Hat, is a multi-billion-dollar company, and it's based on open source software. So this is nothing new in the community of software. It is new in other communities like hardware and other types of technology. So when I say here, and actively sharing the product's design, concept, and method, it doesn't mean that I can make a program and then take all the ones and zeros thrown on the table and say, there you go figure it out. Like, nope, that doesn't count. It means I'm actively sharing in a summarizable, organized way what it is that I'm doing with the community, with the intent, they're going to take that, understand it, make it better, add to it, change it. Okay. Citizen science. So research conducted in whole or in part by amateur or non-professional scientists, often by crowdsourcing. So if normal science is, at least at a university, one professor and 2 grad students trying to answer a question or solve a problem over the course of 5 years in a little room, citizen science is 1,000 people, none of whom are professionals, trying to do the exact same thing. The purpose is the same. We're trying to solve a problem or answer a question. And there's sort of collateral purposes as well. All of this. That's the primary purpose. But in the case of citizen science, we're doing it with a whole bunch of different people all at the same time. So these 2 things have a key component in common, which I think is really important to the future of a lot of things, which is community. Both of these derive value primarily from the community that they build. So in the case of open commercialization, and I'm going to show you some examples later, but what we're doing is we're seeding information as far as possible into the world so that lots of people can become experts. And within that now community of experts, there's going to be business models and value creation emergent in that space. So I'm going to give you some examples later, but it's really, we're extracting value from the community, not from the process of building it. It's different. And then in the case of citizen science, one professor and 2 grad students are going to communicate in a very direct way. But 1,000 people are going to need to build a community in order to be able to communicate effectively. So again, community is a critical component of both of these things. So here's some examples. They're not the only ones, but I think they're good ones. Who's heard of Arduino? 1. Nobody else? 2. Of course. We have. Right, and you know. Okay, so Arduino is an open source development board. These types of boards have been around for years and years and years. And maybe they sold 10 or 20,000 copies at the height of their success. Previous versions of this board, which were closed source, like AVR, stuff like that, and they were sold to, people who were hobbyists, serious hobbyists, and then also electrical engineers. Arduino came out, I don't know, 5-10 years ago, and it was designed by, I don't think there was an electrical engineer among them, but it was designed in a completely open way. So the hardware here is open source, the software, the designs are open source. The only thing that's not open source on this is the name Arduino is trademarked. Otherwise, everything else is completely open. There's about 500,000 or more Arduinos in the world today. It completely blew the market away. And those aren't electrical engineers. Those are lots of regular folks who are now empowered to be able to use this thing. And this is basically a little computer that's a little bit faster and can control stuff like blink LEDs and move servos and do all kinds of stuff. So that's what it's for. And it's been incredibly successful. When I talked about building that community and then creating business models within that community, that's exactly what Arduino did. They built a community of experts. Those experts aren't just their users, but they're also creators, right? A lot of those people in that community build their own add-ons to this and then share it with everyone else. They're building software. They add libraries, the people in the community. They also market, right? They're out there telling their friends, this is a great product. It's really cool. And not only is there sort of individuals doing this, there's businesses. There's got to be hundreds of businesses within this community making a full-time living. So Arduino is a great example of open commercialization being successful. And so everybody knows that the cicadas came out this year, right? The 17-year cicada swarm again. So some folks got together in New York and decided they wanted to track the cicada swarm up the Atlantic coast. And they can do that because when the ground temperature reaches 62 degrees, that's when the cicadas emerge. So they thought, well, Arduino, there's like 500,000 of them, there's a ton of people, we can quickly and easily make a little ground sensor, and we can share it with everyone, and they can all make it, and then we can easily collect the data from them, and do this awesome citizen science project, which they did, and here was the results. They were able to track the emergence of cicadas up the Atlantic coast, and they were able to do that because this piece of technology was available to everyone, and hackable by everyone. Makeable by it. So what you'll see is open communities tend to make open communities. You see the same thing in software. Why is this possible now? And I won't go in a lot of detail into this, but There's communities now that enable people to be successful on a small scale. Maker Spaces, MakerWorks in Ann Arbor, the Lansing Makers Network here, where you have a whole bunch of tools and you don't have to pay much for them. You didn't have to make a $500,000 investment. You could just go pay $100 a month to have every tool you ever need. Crowdfunding sites like Kickstarter, where you don't need to go get $1 million and then pay them back, right? If you have a good idea, you can get $1 million from people who are pre-ordering or just supporting the project. Really, you can't say enough about the importance of Wikipedia and access to learning resources. It is the foundation of everything. Because if you didn't have access to information, you wouldn't be able to figure any of this stuff out. And then, of course, open source is not new. It's been in software for quite a long time. People have learned a lot of lessons and built business models on it. There's a lot of technologies that enable us to work together. So creating that community 30 years ago might have been tough, right? We would have been like writing letters to each other. We wouldn't have had a fax machine to fax them if there was 1,000 people. Right? It would have been practically impossible, but now collaborative development between 1,000 people, entirely possible. The average person can do it. For us, and for a lot of electronics, it's just unbelievably cheaper. This is a $25 board, and the parts in it are 10 or less. Electronics is changing the game. Prototyping tools, 3D printers, they're becoming increasingly cheap. And then professional quality, really everything. Free software, professional quality free software is out there all over the place, and I'm sure a lot of you use it. And then finally, innovators are opting out of the traditional system. Arduino is a good example. So when we talk about how can universities take part, Arduino came out of a university, the Design Institute in Ivrea in Italy. And they decided to commercialize it in a completely open way. And it was massively successful. And they did that because they wanted to share. Yeah, sorry. This is what we built our little unit on. And it is, in fact, one of those businesses I talked about which makes its money within the Arduino community. It's Arduino compatible, but the guy designed it himself. It's a husband and wife team, and they have a successful business. It's another microcontroller, but it's Arduino compatible. This is Lee Moore-Freed, who founded Adafruit. She's a great example of an innovator kind of opting out. When she was at MIT, she was really, really good at designing programs for Arduino and other microcontrollers, and also designing hardware. And again, you think about our community model, she kind of worked her way up to the top of the community as an expert. And people wanted her stuff so much, it got to the point where they just said, can you just sell me like the thing that you're making? Like instead of me having to buy, can you just sell it to me? Or the software? And so, again, instead of having to go out and get $1 million to do it, she had already built her market before she was even there. She had created the expertise and built the market. And then it was a no-brainer. And so she sells all kinds of electronics for hobbyists, and she also continues to design boards, continues to offer software, and it's all open source. So it's not just nonprofits, it's not just universities, it's also for-profit companies that can be successful in this model. So this is our project, which Dave talked a lot about the science. What our intent is to do is to make a little handheld unit, of which this is our most recent model, which is that guy. This is the model that we would like it to look like sort of at the end. With the idea, with this being the idea, right? So users would go out into the field with their cell phone. It would be connected to this object. You'd go up to a plant, you would press a button. It would take that awesome data that Dave was talking about before, send it to your cell phone. It would display, either in simple terms, for somebody like me that says, oh, this plant's healthy. It's like, great. Or in complex terms for somebody like Dave that's like, oh, here's the graph. And like, here's this and here's that. Then this automatically syncs with the cloud, where all of the data from all of the users is stored, because we have cell phones and they're ubiquitous and everyone's connected to the internet all the time. Then users can access and analyze that data via a web interface. Users, not only researchers, but also regular folks. And then users can provide feedback. So maybe a university professor creates a research project, people engage with him on that research project, but somebody finds something really interesting and unique. He can provide feedback to the professor like, hey, you should look at this thing. This thing's really interesting. Or vice versa. It's not necessarily a top-down or bottom-up process. Once you build the community, anyone within that community can take part in any role. So potential users, students, teachers, homeschoolers. In education, what are the two big things right now? Open education and project-based learning. And that's what this is. It's both open education and it's project-based, because you're going to create an experiment that's, maybe it's a day long. You're going out into the woods and you're taking a variety of pieces of data. That's your experiment. Maybe it's 5 years long. You're looking at the effects of climate change in North America on maple trees, right? So everyone in that space is then taking data. Applied science, people like plant breeders. Dave talked about that application. Basic science, I won't explain it, but I just know that everybody in the lab wants it, so I assume then it's useful to basic science. And then other applications. Hackers, once you create something open like this, you have no idea where it's going to go. And the more you limit it, the less far it's going to go. But if you leave it open, for example, what is this? This is an LED, so some LEDs and a detector, right? With this same object, you could make a blood oxygen detector, right? It's some LEDs, you set an IR, and you pick up a detector on the other side. There you go. There's one application that we could think of that would be interesting that someone could mod this and create. So people will pick it up and do interesting things. Okay, so why is this relevant to MSU and what are the opportunities here? One, creating a data platform to generate original research in the plant sciences, right? So though the data will be open, we will be at the center of it. A good example is a project called Foldit, which is a, who's heard of, has anybody heard of Foldit? All right, cool. So it's a video game in which you try to solve protein folding problems. So what was done with algorithms or a study-at-home type sort of massive computing thing before is now done with people, and they're pretty darn good at it, actually. And that project, which was University of Washington, resulted in 7 publications and 30 news articles, right, for the university. So having that data platform in your university is going to create a lot of additional opportunities. Open data. Open data, from the governance perspective, is the new thing, right? Center on Economic Development basically says openness is the way to go. You can read it, and you can read the report, but that's their outcome. Open data is the only way we should be going, and we should be doing it as fast as possible. The Office on Science and Technology Policy just got $100 million to make sure that federally funded research is freely and publicly available within a year of it being funded. And that affects National Institute of Health, which is the largest single funder of research in the world, $33 billion. And then, just directly from the White House, if you look at the Champions of Change, which is sort of nominations for people who are doing cool things, 2 of the categories are open science and citizen science. So this is not something that people at the top are ignoring. This is something that actually they're paying attention to. So in terms of getting grants and getting money, this would be a good opportunity. I think it adds another tool in the toolkit of commercializing technology at MSU. When a technology comes in, we can do it this way, we can do it that way. Right? There's some technologies that are going to be make more sense for the university to commercialize the traditional way. There's going to be some that don't, and we should have the ability to select between those 2 things. Establish MSU as an innovator and leader. So really, if you look at any of these spaces where open has taken a foothold, it has not turned around and gone backwards. It has always gone forwards over time. And there's lots of folks who are at the leading edge who are doing things before they're cool, like MIT with OpenCourseWare, right? That wasn't cool at the time. Like, no one really got it, and now it's awesome. So if you're going to do something original, you have to do it before it's cool, or else you're not doing something original. This isn't a money argument, but I think it's relevant. I think ultimately it's more consistent with the basic tenets of a land-grant university. It is publicly funded. And if we can achieve the same impact without restricting access to data, designs, information, then I think that's a preferable outcome. And I'm almost done here. Again, this is a short version. There's tons more information, examples, arguments that we could go through. So, on to the discussion, but here's my thoughts for next step, and this may be jumping the gun, but I'll throw it in. 1, to enable an open commercialization option for innovators and inventors at the university. Right? So when they come in, you can say, well, we can do it this way, or we can do it this way. So opening up that option. Reevaluating projects in your existing patent portfolio, which may be underperforming or may not be appropriate for the traditional approach, that you could try to apply an open approach to. Provide easy access points to MSU resources, not saying you have to create a new department or anything like that, but basically resources that already exist, put them on a web page, right? So if a professor's out there trying to figure out how to commercialize something in an open way, he knows who to call if he needs marketing help or if he needs a website created or all that sort of stuff. And then finally, see what kind of interest there is in the community for this this kind of method. You know, what do the innovators themselves think? And then finally continue the discussion. I think there's lots and lots of other questions that I preempted with these statements that I'm sure that you're asking.
Greg, on your last major bolded bullet point there, is you've given us this talk or a more engaged or elaborate talk a few different times. What's your sense? What are professors, researchers, grad students, administrators, other people as you've gone out, industry people? What's your general consensus of what they're saying? What are they apprehensive? Are they excited? Are they it sounds good, but I need to wait until or we're going to wait till somebody else does it, or
Well, I'll give my answer then, please. You probably have a better answer than me, but there's some frustration. Like there's grad students who are unable to graduate because they're waiting for some of their work to go through the patent process. There's points of frustration like that I've heard. There's professors who have been frustrated with the process of traditional commercialization, and also professors who maybe their technology wasn't really appropriate for that, but still could have had impact, and therefore kind of got stuck in limbo. Now, that being said, I'm a big proponent of this, so I'm going to talk to people who are going to be like that. So I admit my bias from the very beginning.
Sure.
But I also think that people don't. So I came from a space where I was commercializing technology in a business. This is the way I wanted to do it, and I just didn't know how. So I wasn't given that option because I didn't understand how to do it, and we still don't really understand, but we're making a lot of progress. So I think that's the big problem. Is someone says, "Well, now what?" It's not easy. So.
I think this open models have started to permeate science and revolutionize it. I think there's a mixture of models out there. The traditional need to get your papers published and get your patents and all that going. There are also the things that have really changed science have been open, sharing of data, and that's an important thing. Is it's not always that piece of equipment, but it's the data that it generates that's really, like going back to the original scientific discussion, why this particular project is a good one to start with. The data is really critical. We don't have it. It would be this whatever, but we've already started this because in our existing systems we've generated over 6,000 characterization of over 6,000 lines. And now people are coming to us with ideas. Have you looked at this mutant? Oh, well, let's just look it up, and there it is. So this will have much better impact. And I think that what professors or academicians are really after is not the money, it's the impact. And that really goes back to your point about the appropriateness for a university. And whether you can make money on this, well, I think there are good examples where we can. I don't exactly know or care how that happens. I'm definitely into for the kinds of questions that we're trying to answer, the impact for me is going to be much greater if we can do this. And for us, if we can find those key points that make plants better or more robust, no matter how we get it, it's going to be an awesome thing.
Could I say something? So you have a unit like this, and you commercialize it, and of course you're not going to commercialize this because it's people will break it.
But you mean commercialize it?
Well, just say
you sell them to people.
You sell these,
You
but
make them
you
sell
go
them.
through the traditional IP process, and you start a company, and you sell them at competitive rates to what the traditional photosynthetic measuring machines cost, and you might be able to reach 2% of the market because they're really expensive. But if you make them cheap and you sell them cheap, then you flood the market and everybody can buy them. I have a good friend of mine teaches high school science. She wants these for her class so that the students can go out and use them, right? Everybody will be able to buy them, and that's where the impact comes in for MSU, and you still have a business model. People are purchasing them. It's just a lower cost. And so,
Is the difference in just the margin?
The
That
difference is one has
some
intellectual
corporations
property
take you
and
to
the
give a
other one.
margin?
No, there's a difference in the key difference is intellectual property. Right. In one case, if somebody wants to make a change to the piece of equipment, or in fact even resell it, they can't. And in the other case, they can't.
Could you build that on Arduino?
It is built on
It is.
Arduino.
And-
That was why we built it that way.
And actually, so those photobioreactors, those are controlled by an Arduino-based product.
Let me interject something here about our experience with the photobioreactors, which are, by the way, they're all over the world now, and there are 200 working right now. I was just at this meeting, and they're a big heck. But you know, and they are. Our goal was to make them 10 times cheaper than anything out there. We didn't quite get there; about 7 times cheaper. So, but they really are changing the field. But they are nowhere near what we really need to get permeation out into the world. But the major cost here, the major difficulty, is in the support, the commercialization. You have to support a business and you have to support the product. And the model that we're talking about here is a little different because you distribute that cost. And you distribute the innovation that's possible too. This is the photobioreactors are closed. But we've actually even had trouble getting our own parts for our own photobioreactors because Photometrics is licensed that we can't have access. We got to buy it through them. So that's a system that, okay, we've gone there and it's effective, but it doesn't get where we need to go to have the full impact of what we want to do.
I'm sure there's about a zillion questions around the table, but I wonder if we might just quickly go around the table so we know who's
Yeah,
here.
get a sense for what's, yeah. Yep.
Do you want to start?
I'm just listening right now.
So we all are. Oh, just your name and then we'll jump.
Oh, I'm John Bartholomew. I direct the Institute of Water Research.
Okay.
So education, modeling, we get involved with communities and community input and social networking at the community level and so on. So again, how this might tie in there so people can better understand their multiple impacts and accumulate that relative to the health of the community or something like that.
Obvious why you'd be interested, yes.
Robert Zegrak, I'm part of the team that designed that, and I was dedicated to the electronics part of it.
Suheka, I'm the Associate Dean of the Broad College of Business, and I want to see if we can help with open commercialization.
Brad Ricker with University Development. I do corporate relations in the ag, food, and biopharma areas. Before I came to MSU, I worked at UW-Madison. I was a technology manager, licensing inventions to industry. So this is pretty interesting, and a lot of those were in the ag field. And I saw things that rotted on the vine because they didn't get pulled into the commercial system, but I also saw, things that were significant funding sources for the university by going through that. So I can see all sides of it.
I'm Quinn Shepard, going into my freshman year of high school, and I'm seriously considering studying plant biology at MSU.
I'm Dave Shepard. I brought Quinn with me today. If I convince him to go here, it's going to save me a lot. But I also work at IT services.
I'm Lorelei Davis. I'm in the Business Connect office here.
I'm Patrick Hayes. I'm the communications manager with MSUglobal.
Now, Jerry Reed with MSUglobal.
Carrie Warren, Associate Dean, College of Nursing. Really just trying to learn about the process.
Mary Nelson, I work at the cashier's office. I'm here on the Making Money comment that was made. We're here to help guide you, hopefully, and offer some options on how to help make that happen.
Gene Wilker, I work for Mary in the cashier's office. My specialty is e-payments and payment security. One of those resources that you were talking about.
My name is Julie Fung. I direct the online Master of Science in Food Safety and also do research around food safety and health issues.
Teresa Bernardo, One Health Knowledge Initiatives. We do a lot of things in common, so interested in open resources, open data, open everything.
Charlie Hosman with the MSU Innovation Center. We're all in old pals.
No, it's not true. I mean, we really think that both routes are.
I'm here not as a naysayer. I'm here.
Yeah. I'm Ben Luker. I work with Dave, part of the team building these things.
So, might I ask,
for questions about what they're doing, but also your thoughts about how you could see similar things being applied in other areas. And are there any particular things you want to crowdsource from the group while you're here?
What we would like to crowdsource from the group here. Well, I think there's a long way to go. I mean, I think we could start, but eventually the big challenges and the big opportunities are going to be once we get this stuff out there and dealing with all the data and managing how the data is produced, how the metadata is organized, and how it's distributed, how it's mined for information. That's where the future of all this is. If you want to make money on it, that's going to be it.
The data is the new currency. Just like
yeah.
Bic giving away the razor and selling the razor blades. Now it's, Google gives away space. Everybody's giving things away. You're giving away tools and the ability to innovate, but you want to be part of what comes out of it.
So smart people are going to really pick on that stuff and figure out what's important. That's what we need to build. That's where we're not the world's expert on that. We're good at photosynthesis and building tools that measure stuff, but that's where we have to branch out, if you ask me.
But you're not saying the data wouldn't be open.
The data will be open, but it's just like the people who did the Human Genome Project. Geez, those guys, they made it all open pretty much from the start. And they still made a lot of money on that. So, and because they were right in it, they knew what they were looking for.
Yeah, it's, and everyone in the open community recognizes that it is innovation around the business model. That's the hard part. Right? It's not that hard to identify an existing market, use an existing business structure, and make it happen. Not to say it doesn't take a lot of work and effort and knowledge, but the hard part is coming up with a new business model that no one's done. And this is not in the space of open software, that's relatively known, but in the space of open hardware, especially as it applies to universities, relatively new. There are some examples and other people working on this, and I think having you folks think about what you think that model would look like and what it would entail would be useful.
Well, it's some things you can't find out until you just try. And when you say you're not the experts, neither is anybody else, right?
Yeah. Well, we can think of cases where an industry might find it useful. For example, I mentioned the dynamics responses of photosynthesis to different environments. So are there species out there, crops, varieties out there that will do this? And that is a mineable data set. We don't have that complete data set. There's another thing called C4 photosynthesis that corn has. It's more efficient under some conditions. And there are species of C4 that haven't been determined. Most of them haven't been determined. And so if we can use our simple devices here to do that, that's another mineable data set. So there's a way for the industry, and this was actually Greg's idea, to come in and suggest experiments that could be done for fee, that the community could go after.
I guess with the example that was given about something that would be similar would be monitoring oxygenation in living things, and I'm thinking human living things. It seems like there would be a whole lot of ethical issues if we got into these broad databases on people, because of when we're looking at data, human subjects is such an interest, as opposed to if you were gathering large, vast quantities of data on plants. Has that come up at all in any discussions of how human subjects would impact?
I just threw out human subjects as an example of what people might do with it. We have no direct intent to create a product which...
No, I was just saying, but that kind of a thing, we're looking broadly at the area. It's one thing to say, let's go ask everyone to do things in a broad way, but I don't know how that would be perceived if it was human data to be able to use it, unless there was some built-in controls which cost.
Well, we are exactly the wrong people to ask about
Yeah.
that.
Why I was asking it more generally, because
I think it's a good, for going at this incrementally, have an impact, but go at it incrementally. So you don't have to deal with it. Plants are excellent. They don't scream when you put them in the blender. They don't sue anybody, so we're okay. But I think that other people may want to do similar things.
Although the
they would
paint
have to deal with
owners
these
might
things.
So I'm curious about the open data idea coming out of this open hardware, because what about you've got something really useful, and so Monsanto buys 10,000 of them, right, to equip, and they're not going to put the data out there unless they want to, right? If it has
That's a great,
strategic.
no, that's an excellent point. There's actually a variety of licensing models that can essentially persist an open license throughout the use of whatever the product that it is. And one is called copyleft. It's a good example. And actually there's a number of companies which use copyleft.
Copyleft?
Copyleft, yes. That use copyleft.
Like the socialist?
Versus copyright.
More so versus copyright.
You're talking to a libertarian, actually. But copyleft is used actually by some companies almost as an aggressive tool to enforce openness, to prevent people from doing that, because then you have to then add that information. Any derivative works, what it is basically, any derivative works from the existing product must also have the same license as the current product. And there's a variety of people. CERN has their own open license. MIT has an open license. Copyleft is an open copyright. Creative Commons has a variety of licenses. So there's a ton of licenses out there to basically let you do whatever it is you want.
So let's say, just to play with this, so Monsanto Bike's one of those, right? It has this license, copyleft license to it. They deconstruct it because it's all open source materials, right? And they say, we want 10,000 of these without any obligation or whatever, so they go ahead and they do that, right? And they maybe even...
Open doesn't mean no application necessarily.
Well, but there's no, because there's no patents, there's nothing, I'm imagining, that keeps it from going into the private realm.
Well, okay,
I'm not arguing, I'm just
No, it's great.
that.
It's a great question. It's perfect. I need to learn more about open source software and history and examples. But if you look at open source, generally, if you create an effective open community, those who break out of that community or take information from that community and use it in a closed way are usually not appreciated. So,
public square.
Yes. Yes. And I guess ultimately the way that I came to the conclusion that this was the right thing to do was, you know, if I lived in a world and worried every time somebody made $1 from something that I came up with, you know what? I don't care. Go make $1.
There are good examples of research tools being made available free to academic institutions, but at cost to industry. I know that we have to sign off on these material transfer agreements and these non-disclosure agreements when we're using molecular biological tools that we want that could have that. Monsanto certainly has to pay a lot for, and I don't know how well these are enforced. I don't know anything about it. I know that they require us to sign something, but we get to use it, and then they cover something. So I leave that up.
In the realm of software, corporations are starting to get this, like IBM, they bought in big time. They have their own people working on open source projects because they open source software, because they find it's their services and other things added to that are going to be most valuable.
Business model.
Yeah, just faster innovation too. It's really good.
And actually, this is a little different, but so Adafruit, I think a little bit, she has all these projects. She's built this company, and she has all these projects that people will make things. But then how she makes money is actually she supplies them with the parts that they need to make them, right? Because it's difficult. And so for something like this isn't the last version, right? There'll be an optic that is designed for it that somebody might not necessarily be able to just buy. But is it possible that MSU actually sells parts of it on the stores at the stores, and so people can buy the parts from MSU and put them together and build and whatever they want? Anyway, that's just an idea.
It occurs to me when you talk about being another tool in the toolbox, the place where it would be most useful are things that are not easily patentable, or you could reverse engineer around pretty quickly. You wouldn't, I'm just guessing from looking at that thing, that it wouldn't be hard to make something a whole lot like it that wouldn't violate any kind of patent to put around it. All of the algorithms that David has worked with about how you send light down, detect it, and how you relate that back to what's going on in the plant, those are all in the public domain. How you build this thing, Well, not your particular, but the equation you're using, like the QEs
Some of
and the
those, yes.
QBs and that kind of stuff. So that kind of stuff's in the public domain already. So it's a question of how do I put something in my hand that can put the light down, detect it back, and then send it forward. So in a case where I think it'd be hard to patent, easy to reverse engineer, that would be a direction you say, is there any way we can still take advantage of our expertise and build what we're doing?
I think to add on one more piece to that is there are certain technologies which are hard to extract value from. It requires a lot of upfront money to be able to extract value from the market that you're providing. Software being a good one, right? Everybody copies the software. So now you got DRM and all this large upfront investment to make sure people don't copy it. So there's an increasing amount of technologies like that too, because again, with 3D printers and cheap electronics, it's so easy to copy that you just business model around it.
Yeah.
So this is sort of a different kind of question.
Like,
So I get that all the data would be open, et cetera, but what about the community? Is the community, would that be open? In other words, let's say Monsanto said, I would like to use your quote community in the pursuit of this particular field. Would they know who the community is? Or is that, so everything is open?
yeah, I mean, the community is not, I say it like, you know, it's not like everybody comes to a party and they're like,
No,
you know, but it's a, you know, in the case of, let's say, Arduino. You know, Arduino has sort of an official forum. People go on and ask questions. But then there's hundreds of other sites that have their own forums and their own information. Arduino has a development group that maintains its libraries and software, which actually consists of people, sort of successful people within the community who are good at that, updating those libraries. So that's sort of a community. So it's a very broad term. And they can engage in that space however
I
they
guess
want.
I was trying to think about other ways of, funding the research. And if, say Monsanto had a particular thing they wanted to study, if Monsanto went to your cloud, so to speak, they might say, go away. But if MSU said something, they might, I'm just trying to think through the
I can
various
see
models.
an industry like Monsanto actually wanting to direct some of the research or direct some of the development, in which case that there ought to be a way to have them funded.
Yes,
That's
sort of where I was going. Yeah, I was trying to go there, but.
No, it's absolutely true. You know, I think that they would make money off this. So.
Are you familiar with the Army of Women model? Dr. Susan Love, she's a breast cancer surgeon and researcher at UCLA. And what she's done is she's trying to get 1 million women as a pool of subjects for breast cancer research, and she's up to almost 400,000 now. So what all these, this is just a good example of a community that can be available for various things. So they receive emails, they agree to receive emails of anybody that's doing any clinical trials and what sort of subjects they need. So there's one example not long ago, there was Wisconsin and Fred Cancer Hutchinson Institute, and they needed 1,500 women, with particular characteristics for a long-term environmental study, and they got those subjects in 24 hours. So if you look at the cost for most research in terms of setting that up, finding the people, getting people that are actually willing and interested, and the people that joined up, were saying, thank goodness for these researchers, how often do you hear that? So you can create a community that is very, very invested in doing this, and they'll come up with things that you didn't even make out.
But let me add one more thought to that too. This is the sort of full idea that we came up with was, so imagine you have this community, and let's say there's 10,000 people in it, let's 10,000 people. And then Monsanto comes in and they say, we want people to measure grasses all across North America in this GPS location during this time of year, right? So because you have the community, when somebody, goes to use their device, like something pops up and says, hey, you are in this GPS location and it's this time of year, do you want to take part in this project? So in order to create an experiment, maybe between 0 and 50 people, if you want to use if you want to 0 and 50 people, it's free. But if you want to have 5,000 people, right, then it costs something. So there's and that actually to me makes sense, because you are charging for something you've created, which is not free, which is building community. That to me makes sense. That connection makes sense.
But what about the person who doesn't own the grass? You want to get grass measured in this area, so I've got a device and I just go wandering around, but somebody else owns that grass and property.
You're thinking that the people who own the grass will have intellectual property?
No, they just own the grass.
They just have property.
It is their property. The grass is their property.
NASA's chlorophyll measurements
That's right.
from
Ocean.
space.
Yeah.
They're
So for
collecting that
this
data
example,
without-
but you've got a good point. If you say you've got an ability to go around and check, for example, the women who didn't sign up couldn't turn in their neighbor's information because they weren't signed up.
Right.
So there might be limits on what you could get. in
Exactly.
this
That information will not be revealed. I mean, only geographical location and that type
But
of
that
grass.
still doesn't stop the fact that you may be encouraging someone to trespass.
Oh, you can put a clause in there and say that this needs to be in
We're not
in
responsible
federal
for your
lands or
trespassing.
parks or
Take care of it.
what.
Or your own by commission.
Not to take it in a weird direction, but bear with me a sec. So, having had kids in the house, EverQuest, World of Warcraft, there's these incremental little things that you do and you get rewarded. Or you get a quest. So let's tap into that because it's so addictive. Mongolian barbecue. There's all this kind of food that you don't necessarily know what to do with. But there's some recipes on the wall. Oh, if I follow this, I've got to start again. Now you might, third or fourth time back, have some opinions and you don't need to look at the recipe. So all of that's about, I'm a parent with kids, or the world's got lots of parents with kids. How do I get involved in this citizen scientist? Where's my recipe? There are all these opportunities. How do I get that addictive, hey, I'm doing an experiment, I'm doing an experiment, now I need to win that.
If, you can imagine the case I just said about, find the planet that has the fastest rate of photo protection and recovery, which is something you can measure easily. Go out and do it, and you get a reward, you get points for that.
Yeah.
And this is very much along the folded model, where they had prizes, or they're not monetary prizes, they're just pull factor things, right? And apparently, I talked to the researcher who put that together, and he says, "Oh man, this is horrible because they got all these. They had to intervene because they were fighting with each other." But it's exactly right. You could really imagine, and if it's open, then you can imagine people building these games by themselves.
Yeah. I've heard the RO say, I'm not supposed to say a co-curricular transcript. I don't know if you've heard co-curricular. These extra things, how do I get them?
Yeah.
I'd love to see this as part of how do I get into MSU? Look at all these interesting things that I've done and have some sort of merit badge.
Well, now you're talking about the whole badges. There's a whole movement towards creating badges as a method for recognizing achievements, basically. Yeah, and if you go to Mozilla Open Badges, check it out. Also, your first statement is like, how can we make this? Basically, it's a question of how can you make it sort of sexy and easy to get sort of these accomplishments? I think the website which is by far done it the best in the DIY community is called DIY.org, and it came out like 6 months, not that long ago. But the DIY community is this massive distributed thing. Like I said, there's like an Arduino website, and there's a Raspberry Pi website, and there's all this stuff, and there's Instructables, and there's Makershed, and they all have projects that you can do, right? But it's a giant mess, basically. And when you do a project, you're like, oh, well, now I did it. Nobody knows I did it. But what DIY.org does is it badgifies all of those projects, links to them, and then it gives you a point system for improving it, and it also just looks really cool, and it has little cool animals and stuff. It's fantastic. So you should check it out, because it's totally good. It's like the answer.
So how does the back end work? The place where they're putting together the boards and putting them in an envelope and sending them out to people who want them, how is that funded?
Well, there's a couple of different models. You could make them and build them and sell them yourself, right? You'd go to China, or you'd have a board house produce them, and then when you got an order, you'd ship them. Maybe the MSU would do that. Maybe you have a spin-off for-profit company that would do that. Maybe you have a spin-off nonprofit that would do that. There's lots of nonprofit citizen science projects that, in fact, sell equipment. That's part of their business model. You could simply make the whole thing open and make an agreement with SparkFun or Adafruit and say, you guys do it. Like, we'll continue to develop. You give us 10%. They will do that.
So there are existing organizations who you could essentially license the rights to.
If you wanted to, yeah. We don't need to license the rights. I made a board game that I was gonna have SparkFun make, and I called him. I was like, well, "What do I need to do? I don't have any. I don't have any license, and I got nothing." He's like, "I'll just give you 10%. Like every time we sell one, we give you 10%." It's like, okay. So you
I want to
need-
be mindful of time. We are at the noon hour,
Yeah.
so this
Yeah.
is scheduled till 12. But if I don't know if anybody has to go anywhere, we're not going anywhere. But just in case you had another appointment, and there are no clocks hanging on the wall, so
Unfortunately, I have to go because I have another meeting I'm late for.
okay. David, thank you.
That was a very fast hour because it was so fast.
Yeah, it was very good.
Thanks,
I
Steve.
wanted to ask you, Quinn, if you were in high school and you had one of these kits. for
I'm
doing
about
your-
to go into high school.
That's what I mean. It's irrelevant. So, it would be.
What would you do with
I
it?
see a team. Yeah, I was just thinking that we would love to incorporate not only an educational thing, but as a way to get high school students into real science. I mean, this is not. This looks like a toy, but it's not, because it makes real cutting-edge stuff. It's not a second-rate instrument.
Yeah, we're not making the same.
Sure. I unfortunately have to go. And
Thanks,
I need to
Dave.
take my computer with me. Thank you all for your.
Well, thank you both very
Thank you.
much.